Hit record. Right. And I think we had a note in the chat. Yep. Thank you for the reminder to hit record. Great. Yes. And Roger had a great note in the chat as well. If you're logged in through One Stop Workshop, you will only see presenter view and you won't be able to see the participants. If you log in through your Zoom platform on through your own web browser and through your own account, you will be able to switch views, but just know that with One Stop Workshop, it is primarily presenter view. All right, so that's it for me this morning. I'm going to turn things over to Dalisha, and she is going to give you lots of great information this morning. So thank you all for attending.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Okay, I'm a little sad because I missed everybody's faces because I was on the virtual One Stop thing, and I was like, why can't I see people's faces? What is wrong? So I switched over. So we are going to have some interactive parts of my session. And so please, I am begging a little bit. When we start interacting, please turn on your cameras. You don't have to do it now, I know. But when we start interacting, I'd love to see you again since I missed you the first time. But so I am here. Let me start presenting my screen. This is always a challenge because I have 3 different screens in my office, and presenting that on Zoom is not fun. Okay. Thank you. Go away. And there we go. Get your faces back. Okay, so can everyone see a screen that says telling your story of impact? Great. So I am Dalisha Shingler. I am a research associate is my formal title, but you will hear me throughout the session say I am a program evaluator. It's a bad habit. Program evaluation is a part of my job, but it is not my full job. So I'm a research associate at the Research Evaluation and Measurement Center at the College of Education at the University of South Carolina. It's a mouthful. And like I said, I will often say throughout today, as a program evaluator, that is one part of our office. We also conduct research studies. If you are an ABC school, you know, throw something in the chat, like raise your hand or something, because you've probably gotten an email from me in the past few months because we are conducting a research study with the ABC Institute. So if you got a survey from me and you filled it out, thank you. So you see those things from me. And what I want to do today is lend some of the tools that we use over at our office to you. Now my mouse stopped working and now I can't. Give me a minute, guys. Technical difficulties. Okay. So now the introduction that Jenny asked for earlier, I couldn't give because it's important to what I'll talk to you about today when we talk about evaluation. So I do a heavy part of my job is program evaluation. And you don't go to college and get a formal degree in program evaluation. There are some programs out there now that give certificates in program evaluation, but program evaluation is pretty important. You have to do evaluation for every federally funded program that's inside of education and outside of education in our nation. So program evaluation is a big thing, but it's not an often talked about thing. So we're going to change that this morning, and I'll tell you why. So I was saying that, like, I didn't go to school to be a program evaluator. I went to school to be a middle school math teacher, and I taught middle school math. I have a degree. My degree is actually in middle school math and ELA. I've never taught ELA. Like it helped me write my dissertation, so I'm grateful for it. But I do love math, which, go figure, I ended up being a research associate. So I taught middle school, and I also worked as an instructional coach and a math interventionist for about 10 years. And while I was doing that, I did pursue a graduate degree in what is called the Foundations or the Social Foundations of Education from the University of South Carolina. Now, when I got into that program, I just wanted to understand why children in certain contexts were struggling to learn. But what I got from that program is I also became a qualitative methodologist-ish. I put ish there because qualitative methods is pretty deep, and I don't want to take on that title so willy-nilly. But what qualitative methodologists do is we want to learn more about people's experience in programs and people's experiences in schools. And so that's what I did with my middle school students. And now, how that led me to be an evaluator. I am an evaluator with arts-focused programs, which is why I'm joining you all here today. I work and manage 2 arts-focused programs, Arts Grow SC, which I see Jennifer Coffey here, and she has her image is Arts Grow SC logo. And then I'm also an evaluator and a research lead for the Community Access to the Arts in Rural Education, also known as the CARE Project, with Kim Wilson from the ABC Institute. So all into the arts world in South Carolina, and I'm very grateful to be here. Math teacher in arts world. It's lovely. It's working really well. Now, I share all of that to say all of us can put on the hat of an evaluator. Again, I gave you my introduction to show you that I did not go to school for anything called program evaluation, but I evaluate programs every day. And so what I want to do today is lend to you that you too can evaluate your very own program. And I'll talk to you more about, we talked, the title of this session is data, and we're going to talk a lot about data, but I want to talk about evaluation very specifically, because I think it's very important to strengthening the work that we do and also disseminating the strength of that work. All right, so a little light agenda for our session today. We're going to do some definitions. So I've been using evaluation a lot already, but I want to define and differentiate research and evaluation, and kind of talk about the place for both and try to make a case for one of them more so than the other for our context. And then I want to talk about evaluative processes, and I'm going to mix that in with different checkpoints, because I don't want to be the only one talking when I want to hear your questions. I want to hear your pushback, like, I thought we could talk about research in here. So I want to hear from you and what you need. I heard Jenny told me that, from session Tuesday, you're curious about data and how to use it. And so I want to hear more about those curiosities and hopefully be able to lend you some support here. All right, research and evaluation. So our office is called Research, Evaluation, and Measurement. Those things are very similar, but they all have differences to them. So research really focuses on, and I will be frank here, the definition of research that I'm using here lends itself to a quantitative type of research, not so much a qualitative type of research, and I'm saying that as a qualitative researcher. But research generally is focusing on generalizable statements across a broad population. And so we want to, when people go in research, and they also do this in a controlled environment, that's very important to know. Because when we're looking at programs, we're looking at the context, constraints, assets, and also struggles of a local context in their program. So that's different in research. Research is usually a controlled environment. Quantitative research is usually a controlled environment, and you're looking to gain some information to then spread this out to a larger population and say, hey, this probably works for your population. Now, I think we should definitely use research, and in our evaluations, we start with research. We start with, well, what have people said should come of this type of intervention? That's where we go. We say, well, in the past, the research has said that this type of intervention will yield this type of result. Often we find that depending on the context, you're not going to get that output, and that can be disappointing. That is why I think our time today will be served better at looking at evaluation. So evaluation focuses on learning about the input, the impact, and the outcomes of a very specific program. And it's looking at how does this program perform in this context. And I think that is important, especially as Melanie is going to lead us in a conversation about telling your story in an effective way. One, I think it has to be your story. Because sometimes we go into spaces and we tout other people's stories. And then maybe if we go back to our spaces and we experiment with these other people's stories, we don't get the other people's outcomes. And then where do we go from there? And then what do we tell our stakeholders? Whereas if we look at our context and we evaluate our programs for their strengths and their areas of opportunity, we can prove the worth of our programs and improve the processes and outcomes. So that's why I think evaluation serves us, because we kind of get to dig into our context. We can use it a research lens. We definitely want to look at studies and say, what did they do here? How did they run their intervention? Okay, well, I want to pull that in and then evaluate, was it effective? Are our interventions moving students forward? Because that's what you don't get with research. With research, you are looking at someone else's students being moved forward. With evaluation, you can pull in that research, try the intervention they use to move their students forward, and then evaluate to see, did you do what you set out to do, which is so important. I'm going to get off my soapbox because I can go on forever about evaluating before we start doing things. Just know I have a heart for that. Sometimes we tend to do things because we saw someone else do it, but have we ever stopped to see the effectiveness of what we've done already? And also the process. And we'll talk about process versus outcome in a few slides. Now, an important note, because we are in the world of education and evaluation, when we talk in education about evaluation, it's usually teacher evaluation, like, what is it called? 4.0. That is not what program evaluation is about. We may talk with teachers to understand what they think about a program, but we are not evaluating people. We are evaluating our program. Now, that will cause us to look at the practices of people, which is fair, but we're not going in with evaluation at all with a punitive lens. We are going in with a curious lens. We want to see what's working, and we want to see how to strengthen it. And we do want to see what's not working, because we want to stop doing what's not working. Okay, so Roger has probably seen my spiel on this. I am a big fan of the profile of South Carolina graduates. I do think that we should work towards it. Our office has actually made a survey called the Classroom Practices and Impact Survey, and it is based on all of these competencies. And the reason I like these competencies is because no matter what we call it, profile of South Carolina graduate, profile of a North Carolina graduate, anything, these are the 21st century skills that sharpen our scholars to have meaningful lives and connection and be meaningful parts of our workforce. And so I'm going to continue to flash this to show how evaluative thinking ties into these 21st century skills that we are to hone in on as educators. Now, I only pulled 4. I had to pull back because I had some more, but I don't like my slides to be crowded. So just know that out of these competencies, I was able to pull about 6, which is half of the competencies. But today we're going to focus on investigating through inquiry, using sources, that's that data everybody's looking for, reasoning quantitatively and qualitatively, and then designing solutions. So that's going to be our framework as we go through these slides and as we think about evaluative thinking. Okay. So the first thing when we do a project is the evaluation of a program, or sometimes we call it a project, is we need to start with the question, what do you want to learn about your program? And this may be a new paradigm for some folks, but we do need to ask ourselves, like, okay, I'm doing this, I'm changing this curriculum, I'm introducing this new instrument, I'm introducing this new technology into my visual arts class. What do I want from this? It's as simple as that. What outcomes do I want from this? Or what types of experiences do I want my students to have? So you start with evaluation questions, and I do have a handout that will come after the session to continue to get you acquainted with the process. But you always want to start with some questions. Do you want to know how the process is implemented? I know the sexy question is, how does this move students forward? Like, how does this help test scores? Or how does this help, X skill? Those questions are important. I do think they're very important. But if you miss questions about how you got the students there, you'll miss replicating that great system that got great outcomes. And so we talk about evaluation questions in two ways. We talk about process-oriented questions and outcomes-oriented questions. I argue that if you go through looking at your program and your only question is, did this make my students score better? You're going to miss how to continue to grow your students in that way. And so I would offer, whenever you are starting to look at your program, to evaluate your program, asking questions about, what did I do? How did I do it? How would I change it? And then ask about, how did it change students, or how did it change student outcomes? Now I'm going to pause and I'm going to check the chat, make sure I didn't, okay, no, that works for me. All right. So now, here are some example evaluation questions from some of our projects that we're currently evaluating. So I pulled this from 3 different projects that we have that we're currently evaluating across the state. We're evaluating an after-school arts integration program. We're evaluating a rural arts integration program, and then what's the third one from? The third one was from a summer program that we have been evaluating, and they're all arts programs. So, if you feel like you need to steal one, steal one. So we typically say, to what extent, that's the STEM we typically lead with, to what extent are the arts integrated units increasing student engagement? And right now we're just going to dig into the questions, but I'm going to talk about how you retrieve data to answer that question. So that could be your question. If you're interested in getting students more interested in the arts, I know one project we're working on, we don't have a lot of student interest. And so we need to ask questions around the processes of building student engagement in the arts. And so this is a fair question. To what extent, if any, are the arts integrated units impacting students learning the academic content areas? And so now we're moving from engagement to academic content areas. How, if at all, are students using the skills and lessons from the after-school units in their academic content areas throughout the school day? All right, so you can tell we have a focus in our evaluations. Our goals, so our program's goals are to see the arts bolster learning in the content areas. And that is why our evaluation questions look like this. Here are some more. To what extent, if any, is the project impacting student academic outcomes? Now, that's different than content area learning, because in content area learning, I can bring in social studies, science, ELA, or math. When we write this question, academic outcomes, we're specifically going to be looking at SC Ready. And so this is an example of an outcomes-based evaluation question. To what extent, if any, is the project impacting student behavioral outcomes? Discipline, student discipline records, engagement, and soft skills, because they need them. We know they need them. The last 2 years taught us they need them. They need them a lot. And so if we say we have a priority for it, we should be looking for it. Another thing that I like about evaluation is sometimes we tend to be cynical, but then when you pull the data, because this happens to me all the time, I'm like, we're not making progress, we're not going anywhere. But when you pull the data and you see a difference in discipline, when you see your disciplinary infractions decrease, when you see students increasing in collaboration, you have data to kind of silence some of the negativity of the day. And so I would encourage you to diversify data. I did want to say something about, I took attendance off. Some people have used attendance as a gauge for impacting student outcomes. Attendance is good for maybe like high school, elementary, middle school. A lot of the times a child's attendance has to do with more factors outside of them. So any type of factor where there's a lot of mitigation, we want to shy away from that factor and just kind of pull on factors that we can see in the classroom. Also, I do want to say this, at your own schools, in your own districts, you have certain priorities. So for our project, priorities are content area learning and academic outcomes. Insert whatever district priority that your district has and say, to what extent is the project impacting my district priority A? To what extent is the project impacting district priority B? Make it local. That is the whole point, because when you go back to your stakeholders and they're like, why are we doing this? Why are we prioritizing your arts program? Oh, because in my class, I don't have students getting kicked out all the time. In my class, students want to stay. In my class, students are doing work at this completion rate. And so you want to be able to talk about how you see your students changing and how you see your classroom environment changing. That in turn has the power to spill over into the rest of the school. Again, if we focus on process-oriented, especially in the arts, I won't go into my soapbox on that, but we know as a former math teacher, I have walked into a class where students get to express themselves in a way that is different than they get to be free in my math class, and they are flourishing. I need to learn what those teachers are doing. There was a dance teacher in specific that I'm thinking about at my former school. She gave students autonomy and leadership in her class in a way that I did not. I needed to see that so that I could go to learn, how come so-and-so is not rowdy in your class? How come so-and-so is listening and taking notes? We need to record these things so that we can share these things to impact our classrooms, but also our school communities for the betterment of our children. And what that particular teacher was doing was she was letting the students kind of lead the agenda for the day. And that's something that we can capture in a process-oriented evaluation. What are we seeing? What skills are students picking up that can then be precursors to academic engagement and academic achievement? And so that's another thing that I want to say when it comes to looking at our processes. Guys, before we get to achievement, we have to have the right conditions. Before we get to engagement, we have to have the right conditions. And so we have to nail down and drill down to figure out what are we doing that are producing conditions for student flourishing. All right, second soapbox, I'll step off. Okay, so I've told you we start with the question, what do we want to learn? How is it impacting students' academic achievement? How is it impacting student social skills? How is it impacting insert whatever district priority? Now, we cannot just ask the question. We have to go use data to answer the question. This is important. This is important. I mentioned cynicism, and I mentioned, and it's probably like, we all base things off of our experiences. Hopefully, many of you are very optimistic. Sometimes, just sometimes, I am cynical. That's why you hear me say cynicism. So sometimes I will go off of an anecdotal of what I feel is happening in my classroom. But if I go gather data, I can see, oh no, that's my perception, but it's not reality. And so we cannot just stop with questions and then start answering the questions ourselves, because that's my tendency. Like, well, I know what's going on. I know that soft skills not improving. So-and-so is still fussing with so-and-so. How is that improving? But if I sit down with students and have an interview and ask them what they feel is going on, I will glean a lot more than just staying in my head. And so now we're going to move on to data collection. So you ask your evaluation questions. Again, you're going to have a handout with this process. You ask your evaluation questions. Now you need to collect data to answer them. Again, I repeat, do not rely on your perception alone. Perception is important. And what you see, your observation, I'll say, is important. Do not rely on your perception to tell the story. Allow your students, allow their performances, allow other teachers maybe to help you tell the story, because data is important. Data is not everything, but it is important. So some things you can do: surveys. Put something in the chat. Like, when I say put something in the chat, I mean like a thumbs up. Hit me with a little emoji. Have you ever done an exit ticket? Hit me with an emoji. Exit ticket. Anyone? Somebody. Okay, thank you, Ms. Thomas. Somebody. Exit ticket, turn that into a survey. You know, a lot of people, like, I was in a district where we had like an instructional wheel where we had to do certain things in a lesson. You have to do closure. Close out your lesson with a content-based question, but also drop 2 questions about how students felt about the lesson if you've introduced something new. If you've introduced something new from your new initiative, then ask them, how did it go? What did you think? Did this make you want to do this more? Or did this feel like, I won't do that no more? Because that's what we do in our office. We just went and did data collection at a local middle school, and middle school students will tell you whatever they want to see how is this program impacting students. The best people to ask are students. And so a survey, I wanted to point that out to say, like, a survey doesn't need to be like the surveys you get from me with Qualtrics and all that. It could just be the end of your exit ticket. Put your content question and then put 2 to 3 questions about how students engage with your new content or your new process. Student interviews. Again, you don't have to take up your lunch period to get your student face-to-face with you in the desk with a list of interview protocol questions. That's cute. I like it. I do it. But realistically, what you have at your disposal is when you're walking around monitoring and you're walking around one-on-one coaching students, then you have some questions in your head ready, asking students about their experience, asking students about, is this moving you forward? Is this moving you backwards? According to whatever your evaluation question was. Teacher interviews. If you work in a team, this is important because you may see something in your group of students, but if you're working with a teammate, you need to understand how the new intervention is impacting their classroom. And so you guys can get a holistic view. So when you report to stakeholders, it's streamlined. It's not, well, that's for my class. Well, in my class, you know how that happens. Well, in my class, my students don't need that. Well, in my class, my students need that. Well, let's get together. Let's talk to each other. And then let's come up with a plan of action about moving the program forward. Focus groups are the same thing as interviews. It's just that instead of interviewing one person, you interview multiple people at a time. One, that saves time. It does change the dynamic. Like in the interviews that we just went to the middle school, we did not want to interview one middle schooler at a time because then they tend to get shy. But if you put them in a group of friends, we let them pick their group too. They were like, oh, let me tell you, and I don't like this, and I like that. So that's the advantage of a focus group. Local formative and summative assessment scores. I have formative and summative. So you let that tell your story. If you're introducing a new way of teaching something, you want to look at pre-post data. Before I did this, what was this like? How were students performing? After I introduced this, what are students doing now? What's different? You absolutely, and here's the thing, We talk about summative assessments a lot, but formative assessments are very important because they should be so directly aligned with what you teach because you have a hand on the formative. So if you're not using formative assessments already, I'm gonna do a little shameless plug for another part of our office, the SCAP, South Carolina Arts Assessment Program. They help with art-specific assessment. So we have free resources, you don't have to pay anything, but you should be taking control of your assessments to tell your story of impact. You're doing the work. For those of you who are leads in your district, make sure you help your teachers be able to see how their interventions are impacting student growth. And then I put SC Ready scores because, you know, especially if we're looking at arts integration type work, that's where we'll start looking at SC Ready scores. And then attendance and discipline records are also data we can collect. All right, now it's time to turn on your, thank you, Emily. It's time to turn on your screen. Okay, hello. It's your turn. I'm about to go on mute. Y'all on mute, I'm switching. I'm going on mute. I need some water. No, I'm not going on mute. I like to talk. But what I have here is those questions that I asked earlier, those sample evaluation questions. And then I gave y'all a word bank of data collection, data that you can collect to answer those questions. Okay, so let's just take the first one and let's do it together. Low entry, no pressure. To what extent, if any, is the project impacting student academic outcomes? Which of those sources could we use to answer that first evaluation question? Come off mute and say, yes, Ms. Thomas.
SC Ready data.
SC Ready data. What else could tell this story?
Local and some local formative and summative assessment scores.
Yes, yes. Something else too now. I'm looking for one more.
I feel like attendance and discipline records, even though it's not directly related to student academic outcomes.
Miss Floyd, yes. I'm gonna tell you why. If I had something to give to you, I'd give it to you. All of y'all, just because y'all came off mute. Because we talk in our office a bit about precursors to academic outcomes. If we see student attendance increasing, especially at the high school when they get themselves to school, a lot of them, if we see student attendance increasing, and if we see discipline infractions decreasing, that is more time looking at academic content instead of looking at walls in ISS. Amen. So that is important. That is important. But you guys are absolutely right. When we are looking at this outcome-based question, SC Ready scores, and summative and formative assessment. I know y'all been looking at the second one, so I know you're ready. To what extent, if any, is the project impacting student behavioral outcomes?
Student interviews.
Student interviews. I'm gonna say something about that too. What else you got?
Discipline records also?
Discipline records. And who else can we talk to?
Teachers.
Teacher interviews. Now,
Teacher
I know,
interviews.
yes, if you're the teacher, you like, I don't need to talk to anybody else. I see it. I can tell you what's happening. However, remember that example about how a student is responding in another class? You don't know how a student is walking throughout their day. And so it is important, especially, and maybe because I'm middle school and all of our students, we were on a team, so we needed to talk about everything. You don't know if your class, so if your student has you and you have this new intervention in the beginning of the morning, if they're tired, you don't feel like they're as engaged, right? You don't feel like, well, they're not really engaged, but what if you put them in a good mood in the morning? But you can't see the engagement because they're still sleeping in your class. But if you ask your teammates how they've been going about their day throughout the day now, you might see that your project actually has some bearing on their day, which is not a far fetch. It sounds far, it's not far. We get it from kids. Student interviews are important because, again, perception. Sometimes we perceive students, and I work with middle school, sometimes we perceive them to be doing things like, why are you doing that? Like, why did you think that was a good idea? If we talk to them, we'll learn their why. We'll learn how they're taking in whatever we're giving out. And they actually might be trying to do something to work alongside you. It may not feel like that all the time, but that's why we have to talk to them, because we have some generational gaps, right? So we have some differences in how we may show appreciation. We have some differences in how we may show excitement. And so we need their voice. We really need their voice to figure out, how is this impacting your soft skills? Do you feel like you have more conflict resolution skills now, which is one of the competencies of a profile of South Carolina graduate? And then our last one, to what extent if any, is the project transforming teachers' classroom practice? I can't wait to hear what y'all say for this one. Who we talking to? What we doing?
I know, like, when we've said focus groups before, we've kind of focused more on student focus groups, but I think that even having teacher focus groups would be beneficial.
Yes, we definitely need to talk to a group of teachers with this one. Now, if we're just working with one teacher, we're gonna talk to one teacher. And we could pull it, and this is dicey. We could pull in a trusted admin. I always say it's dicey because as soon as you pull in admin, people think 4.0, they get scared. But if the admin has seen growth and is going to be a proponent of help, that is going to encourage the teacher to keep changing practice towards this goal. What else you got for me for this one?
I mean, if you did surveys to the fear factor of focus groups with an admin is lessened because you have that opportunity to individually complete a survey too.
Yes, and it's anonymous.
Right.
I also wanted to say, I'm glad you brought up surveys, Ms. Floyd, because with the student behavioral outcomes, the surveys would be good there too. That's what we do with the classroom practices and impact survey. We ask, how is it changing children towards these? And you can use a scale like little impact or no impact. So, or big impact or something like that. So also doing surveys. For this last one, I just looked at the time, so I'm about to start, speed reading. This last one, you should also ask students. Again, children will tell you, middle school children and high school children will tell you everything you want to know. Now, I will say we do interview elementary age children. I will say when they're in the lower grades, you want to interview them while they're doing the activity, because if you wait until later, they might not tell you anything except about some lollipops. Okay, so interview them all, but the little right there in the moment. How does this activity make you feel? Do you like when you do these activities? Would you like more of these activities? Is this different from when you're doing a worksheet? Boom, interview done. And so that's how we can grow there. Thank you all for engaging. Let me move us along. Okay, this is you can use Google to help you part, okay? So when you get your data, you need to analyze your data. I have a cute little word on here, use descriptive statistics. I taught this in 6th grade. Mean, median, mode, range. It's frequency data. It's my favorite kind. It's the kind I'm going to show you today because I want to empower you to know that you have what it takes to do this. I do not run all kind of linear regression. I can read one. Don't ask me to run one. We don't need that. We need to see what shows up the most in our data, and we need to be able to find the percent of students who say yes or no to some of our questions. And then the qualitative data, I'm not going to touch it today. Maybe Jenny will bring me back and I'll talk to you about that. All right. Here is an an example of how we use Excel to look at data. Okay, so this is just a survey, and I want to empower you. Remember, especially for coordinators, you can send out a survey. Just send out a survey in Google Forms, Microsoft Forms, and then you'll get a sheet. It won't be this clean, but all you gotta do is like delete columns, literally. Delete the columns you don't need. What I have across the top is the grade level of the student. Again, this is anonymous data. We did ask them for their grade level. So, and we inputted this, we gave the students physical surveys because this was during a summer program and they didn't have access to Chromebooks. Again, you have everything you need. This does not have to be some technologically advanced process. Here is the question we asked. I was excited to come to camp each day. Boom. A 1 means yes, a 2 means no. The activities we did at camp were fun. You can ask that. Kids will let you know. Got a lot of ones there. Ooh. The adults at this camp were fun. So we were looking for engagement. This is why you see a lot of questions. We did have some academic questions. I feel like I will do better in school next year because of the camp. I want to come back to this camp next summer. Okay, so we tallied up what they gave us. Now, ignore all this fancy stuff. My colleague did all these little drop down arrows. All you need to do is go in Excel, type the question. This is again in Excel, and then count up, and Excel will do it for you. Count up how many of your kids said yes to the question and how many said no to the question. So for here, I got 6 no's in middle school, and I got 18 yeses in middle school, okay? All you're doing is counting. These percentages are just to tell us to make sure we have 100% of respondents, okay? That's it. That's it. And so this is just the percentage of respondents, but this is just a simple count. Yes, no. That's all we need to do. And this is what we present to clients. And this is what you would present to stakeholders. When you want to know how your programs are moving the needle forward, if you want to know if children are engaged in your program, you give them a survey and ask them, do you want to do this again? Unfortunately, we got 50-50 for I want to come back to camp next summer. Now, with this type of data, we got so many yeses on all the other questions. We were like, what you think you don't know if you want to come back? It's 50. We expected a resounding, yes, I want to come back to camp. What happens when you get something like that? You need to interview some students. The survey was anonymous, so we don't know who exactly, but we're just gonna we would just pick a larger swath and we just start talking to them. So a lot of y'all said on the survey that y'all liked the activities, you thought the adults were fun. Why? Some of your peers said only half of them wanted to come back. Did anybody say something around you? Like, why would only half of you want to come back? As simple as that. As simple as that. So it's 10:57. Let me do my last slide. After you have done something tidy like this, gotten your percent yes, gotten your percent no's, or whatever type of affirming or whatever you needed to see, you need to present your data. You need to make your case. You need to fight for your program. You need to fight for the kiddos. And so you take your data analysis to engage in conversations. No longer do we have to just go off of anecdotals. Now we have data and a plethora of different sources that we pulled from to say, no, our children need this. No, please don't cut our funding. No, actually, please give us more funding because children are doing well in ELA because of what they're able to draw and show their understanding in my class. So that is it for me. Melanie, I just took a little bit of your time, just a little bit. And I'm gonna stop sharing and I want to ask for questions, but
Please do. Please do. It's okay.
okay. I went fast, but are there any questions specifically on that last part about data collection and data analysis?
Dalisha, I think a good point to make too, you were talking about how easy it can be to kind of come up with those percentages. A lot of those calculations you can do right in Excel. So it's really easy to do that right in Excel, and you can come up with those percentages very easily, and then just make a little table like that last slide and you're good to go.
Yes, and everything we did was in Excel. That's all I use because I am primarily a qualitative researcher. And so I focus on the interviews and focus groups. And so I can't get on SAS and all that fancy stuff. Excel is where it's at. Where it's at. I know that's your wheelhouse, Jenny. I did see something in the chat. I wanted to, Miss Thomas, I wanted to put walkthrough observation as well. I just am always careful with that, because it depends on the school environment. If we want teachers to be a part of the program evaluation process, like I'm thinking of one of our projects, we want to see how our integration is growing in teacher practice. And we were like, oh, let's look at their lesson plans from the beginning of the year to their lesson plans at the end of the year. And then we were like, oh, let's not do that, because they might think that we're like, gotcha. You're not putting this in your lesson plan. It needs to be in there 5 times. So I will just say it depends on who asked to pull it, which was one thing we were going to do. We were going to say, well, hey, why don't you ask, because they know you, they trust you. But I do think that observations can be a data source, and often should be for programs, not just for teachers. And then, sorry, I got something in the chat. The pivot tables in Excel are what get me. That was the little drop downs, Ms. Johnson. Those were the pivot tables, and my colleague Dawn does that. And I'm like, no, I'm just gonna count them. I'm good. I'm gonna count, and then I'm gonna divide what I got by the total, and that's my percentage. So you can figure the Excel out. Ms. Thomas says, what measures do you use for engagement, and how do you present it? Okay, for student engagement, we make student engagement surveys. So the projects that I'm on, we've made 2 of them, and it depended on the program. One of our programs was, it was STEM based. And so we wanted to know about if students felt some more connection with science, technology, engineering. And so we asked, do you think this is fun? Comparatively speaking, and we did interviews for that one too, because we had elementary. So when we're looking at engagement, especially 3 through 5, we're going to ask about fun. The questions that I showed on the screen, those were from an engagement survey. If your kids aren't saying fun, figure out what they say that lends itself to excitement. I'm going to age myself and show that I'm really not cool. They might say it was lit. Lit might have expired at this point, but I'm just using that example to say whatever they say that means fun. I still use fun. Put that in your survey, or if you don't want to put that in your survey, because I probably wouldn't put lit on the survey, I will just put fun, but I will ask them, oh, this is a great example. One of the girls that we were interviewing, when we observed her in class, she kept saying she slayed something. She was like, I'm slay queen all day. And so we were like, when we interviewed her, well, did you slay that project, sis? So whatever it takes to engage them. I would do a survey for engagement, always doing a survey for engagement. That survey had less than 18 questions because we did 3 through 5. But then follow up with an interview of some students. Some students that you see who are really doing the work. So for instance, with the girls that we just interviewed, we did not survey them, but we interviewed them and we chose them because they were actually doing the activity. What we found was that one child was just compliant. She didn't like the activity at all. And so you have to ask them. But I would say for engagement, survey questions was fun, and then also an interview.
Thank you guys. Dalisha, I always learn something. I was in here taking notes too, and I have it in my agenda to give you a call because there's some questions I have for you about some evaluation techniques for us. All right, guys, you learned a lot there. We have a limited amount of time, but that is okay because the whole point and purpose is for Dalisha and I to give you everything you need to be dangerous. So my question, first of all, to all of you is this. What do you want to know from my perspective? I want to make sure that I hit on if someone has burning questions, something of discussion or something along those lines. And I might change up my presentation just a little bit based on what you say and the time that we have. But I want to make sure that I hit everything. So please unmute yourself and let me burning questions, or just not burning questions, some things you may want to discuss.
I'd love to hear about effective communication with school boards and how that can impact how you share your data.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Now, closed mouths do not get fed. So please let me know what's going on. Lauren, thank you.
Yeah, so what about effective communication with stakeholders that are like community members and not necessarily parents?
Okay. All right. Anyone else?
I'll add my favorite way to do these types of presentations is to interweave like personal stories and first person narrative and that heart-wrenching storytelling into the numbers conversation. So making the numbers hit home harder with those feel-good stories. So I want to hear more about that.
Okay. Anybody else? I'm going to share my screen. Typically, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but I felt like I needed to. But I probably will deviate from it because, again, I like to be in front of people, chatting, sitting with them, and getting feedback. So it's okay that your cameras are off, but I may voluntold you to help be a part of this conversation. And I may deviate quite a bit from what you're going to see on my presentation. But at the end of the day, I hope that we all get something from it. And that is the most important part. All right, let's see what we got here. Hold on. I can't do this under pressure. All right, guess I can. All right, so we're going to talk about the whole communications thing in the whole frame of communications and advocacy. So first, advocacy, we're going to talk about that in a second, but I want to distinguish between advocacy and what I call everyday advocacy. So advocacy is more of a specific topic, issue, problem, project, whatever that you want support on. Whereas everyday advocacy is almost education. Some people call it education plans and things of that nature, educating everybody. That's how I distinguish them. But let's go over real quick some of the things that I'll talk about today. Fundamentals of advocacy. And when I say advocacy, a lot of it is what Jenny just said, storytelling, it's communication, it's social media, all of those are tools to bring someone closer to doing what you want them to do, essentially. We're going to talk about plan, organize, and execute, and we're going to give a chance to hopefully have a group discussion and practice a little bit. So I found out what you want to learn and discuss. I want to ask you another question real quick. And I'm gonna stop screen sharing for a second. what is advocacy to you? I talked about it a little bit and differentiated it, but I want to hear from you. What is advocacy to you? Anybody? Marissa, Deidre, Kellyanne, thank you.
I mean, for me, I think it's sharing the story of the successes and the important parts of whatever your program is. Like for me, for my dance program, it's sharing the benefits and why it's important for students in the classroom.
Absolutely. I love that. Anybody else?
Yeah, I was going to say it's any support or plug that you can give in any situation that you're in that shows support for the arts of your program.
I agree with that 100%. And I will say that what you just said is everyday advocacy, as I call it. That's education. And advocacy does not start today if you want something tomorrow. That's probably going to be a no. I mean, you have to do what you have to do if something comes up and you have to advocate for it. But I want you to get out of this that if you haven't been advocating before now, then you should start today. And that's more than just education. It's more strategic than just education. So if you think about your classroom for a second, Kellyanne, you mentioned your dance program. So, and I'll go back to my PowerPoint in a minute. What is the end in mind for your 3 to 5 year goal? Like if you were to ask someone, you know, this year, you're like, we should start thinking about asking for more funding. So think about it in terms of a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road. And what's the plan up to that part to actually make that happen? We can't just start educating people today and then say, okay, here's my ask, because I'll go back to my presentation real quick. Can you see that? Can't see you guys. Okay. It feels like I can't see you guys too, but okay, hold on. I won't go back and forth anymore. Because when you're doing it, much like Dalisha said, we have to start with the end in mind. What do you want people to know? What value does it have? What problem are you solving? So Jenny, to your point about, or all of you asked about specific audiences, let's talk about that really quickly. Start with the end in mind. Who are you talking to? Who are you going to be communicating with? So let's use dance program again with Kellyanne. Who are you going to be talking to? Board members, legislators, business and community people, parents. Who are you going to be talking to? Who's your audience? After you've decided that, the next thing to do is, why do they care? A lot of times we're so close to what we're advocating for, we just expect people to jump on board because we're passionate about it. And that's not the case, because they're passionate about something else. So we know the arts is amazing, period, exclamation point. However, someone else's thing might be foster care. Someone else's thing might be the homeless. Somebody else's thing is just driving economic development. I remember talking to a legislator not too long ago, and he had been in the General Assembly for a minute. He's been there for a long time. And so I talked to him about, I said, what's your thing? Like, what is your thing? And he started telling me all these things. He didn't say the arts. And I said, okay, that's cool, but who's your art? Art, you said economic development. So the arts help with that. You said education. The arts help with that. And, I told him a little bit more. I got into the data a little bit. And I said, so who are your art leaders in your community? And he didn't know who they were. And I'll step back to say the biggest thing is value. What value do you bring to each one of your audiences? That's how you talk to them. For him, the value I found out first, I listened before I started talking. So when you go to Columbia every year, what are you advocating for? What do you hope happens? And I started thinking as he was talking about, how does the arts align with what he cares about? Because if I get on my soapbox for a second, I think education is amazing in South Carolina. And I think the arts are amazing in South Carolina. The problem, though, is oftentimes we don't advocate for either from grassroots level, from the people who actually know what's happening in the classroom. And when we do advocate, we do a lot of educationese. We talk to each other. We talk in the way that each other would understand. But what I want you to do when you start with the end in mind is to really consider your audiences. For example, one of my goals is to make sure people understand that the arts, I always go back to say arts and is and are, the arts are great, right? So if I'm talking to legislators, what do they care about? They care about their constituents. So I make sure I understand what's going on in their specific area. I make sure I understand, do I know someone in their area? Can I tell a story from that perspective of what's going on in their area? What's the data in their area? How many people may get grants or something from the South Carolina Arts Commission in that area? So I educate myself a little bit. What are we going to talk about? And what do they care about? Constituencies, one, voters, absolutely. So to put a pin in that for a second, if you aren't talking to your legislators, if they aren't on your newsletter database, if they're not following you in social media, unless they just don't do that, if you're not connecting with them in all those ways, you're not doing everyday advocacy. And that's really important. They need to be connected to you. When you have invites to performances, even if they never come, invite them personally through an email and that may be a lot of work, but when you need them, it won't be, all of that work will come in handy. So let me give you an example. I used to work for the the Sumter County Cultural Commission, and nobody knew me when I came in that position. And so the first thing I did was a lot of listening. I went out and talked to a lot of the key players, whether they knew the arts or didn't know the arts, whether they liked them or not. And I just listened. The second thing I did was I realized who all the gatekeepers were. And that's what starting with the end in mind means. Who are all the gatekeepers? Whether they trust the arts or not, who are they? And then you come down to, okay, are they advocates? Or maybe they're challengers. What do they care about? And those are the lists I start to make. So I listen, what are the concerns? What are the challenges overall in Sumter County as it pertains to the arts and as it doesn't? Then the second part was, who are the gatekeepers? What did they care about? How do they feel about the arts? And I made lists and I thought about those things. And then I started adding those people to my databases. So when we had things at Patriot Hall, if we had some great things going on, I would let them know about it. As a matter of fact, when we got grants from the South Carolina Arts Commission, they already ask you to tell your legislators, write an email or something about that. But I went a step further. So when we got any type of award or recognition outside of the South Carolina Arts Commission, thank you so much for supporting the arts. This is what just happened, blah, blah, blah. And let me just tell you on the other side, the legislators back then didn't even acknowledge me. Let me be honest. They didn't respond back. They didn't come to events. None of that actually happened until it did. Right before I was about to leave, there were some bigger projects that I was on, and I had already told them about everything else. So when I asked for a meeting, they took it. And then when I asked for money, they gave it to me. And it's about building a relationship. And now that I'm working for the South Carolina Arts Alliance, some of them are my advocates now because they knew my work back then. You never know what's coming up in the future. So my point in saying all of this is to say, look at your audiences without rose-colored glasses. Everybody, let's be honest with ourselves. Everybody initially doesn't care. They don't care about the arts. It's our job to make them see what we see. They may never have the passion, but they need to know about it. So Dalisha was talking about evaluation and things of that nature. So some of the things that you talked about, engagement with students and all of that, that's kind of stuff you talk to parents about. That kind of stuff you talk to your principals about. But the other part of evaluation that you should possibly add to those things is, how do I talk to, when this program is successful, how do I talk to legislators? How do I talk to local officials? How do I talk to the business and the community and the parents? How do I tell those stories? So in the same way as you're asking about engagement or your program, you need to ask yourself, what information do I need in order to tell a story to all of these constituencies? And it may not be all of them, but it probably would be helpful for you to start getting into that rhythm of thinking about all of these audiences. And it may just be 2 or 3 questions added to the survey, but what type of information do I need? What kind of data do I need to talk to them about the things they care about? So go back to my example, art is great. Art is great. So I might give, when I talk to David at the Arts Commission, I might talk about all the specifics, how the needle is moving with engagement. But if I'm talking to a legislator, back to that, where they're caring about their constituency, they're caring about the economic impact, the drivers, the things that their voters care about at the end of the day, because they don't understand all the education stuff because it's not their field. The other part is business. They care about soft skills. They care about the economic impact. How do you add that to it? The parents, they care about their children staying in school, their children being more employable, their children being more engaged, all of those things. So look at it from that perspective. How do I talk to all of these constituencies that can be my advocate for whatever I need now or in the future? Now I'm gonna stop there for a second and ask if that makes sense, and if you have any questions about that. Any discussions? Is that pretty straightforward? Okay. Even with storytelling, I'm gonna just take this off. I'm not gonna use this anymore, just not. Even with, someone asked about storytelling. So I was sitting in the ABC spring meeting the other day, and I was listening to the principal say about arts integrated schools in general, his specifically. He said he had 100% retention. He had 1% of kids disciplinary actions, and something else. It was amazing. And I was just writing this down, and I said, there's a story right there. There's at least 3 stories right there, from the principal's perspective, from the teacher's perspective, and from the student's perspective. He was talking about how their culture has created where even problem children come in and acclimate to the culture because they love it, because they want to be there. Those are 3 stories. Okay, those are 3 stories. It sounds good. And that's great for social media. It is. We should put him in front of the camera, and we will. The parent and the teacher, that's great. Now, that's one story. How do we connect it again to the audiences and what they care about? So one is educating people in general about how arts integration changes everything, or can change everything, right? The right culture with arts integration, it will be amazing. However, I don't know that that's going to change a legislator's mind on giving funding unless that school may be in their district. It might change. They might give an accolade or 2, but how do you tie that story to economic impact, to business? What is that? How we got to make one more step. So if the problem child is at school every day and he's not causing a problem anymore, guess what? He's more likely to go to college, possibly. He's more likely to be engaged. He's more likely to stay out of mischief, because now he's found something that keeps him in school and keeps him engaged in school. So how does that story translate to economic impact, soft skills for businesses? There's an extra story there. So when you talk to the principal, you might say, principal, I need you to talk on 3 perspectives. One, just clearly what it is. You know, this is just amazing. And all of other arts schools, other educators, you know, people who are engaged in the arts, they'll get it. Then I need you to possibly talk from economic impact. What does that mean? Tell the same story, but save some room and some time for this extra part and tie it in together so people can understand. To the board member, the same way. The whole thing is you have to understand your audience. That's a huge part. You have to understand your audience. End in mind. Understand your audience, number one, and not just assume. I think Dalisha said earlier, not from your perception, but from actual conversation. To actually, one of the things, and legislators were looking at me crazy, but one of the things I said was, after they let me talk, because they wanted me to talk first, I said, so what do you hope to get accomplished at this session? And he was thinking to himself, nothing art related. And I was like, that's okay. I still want to know, because to me, I didn't say this to them, but that informs my thoughts about how to approach you in the future. That will inform me to be able to talk to you, because I typically let people go first. I typically ask, just like at the beginning of this class, what do you want to learn or discuss? Because I want this to be a win-win situation, not me just giving information, but you kind of understanding where I'm coming from too. So you have to understand your audience. You also have to understand your goal. What is it that you want to accomplish? And that's why advocacy can be and should be specific. So there's everyday advocacy. Some people call it education, communications, things of that nature. And then there's a specific one where you're more strategic. I want to ask for funding in the next year. So you go back from there, and who do I need to ask? Who are the gatekeepers? How do they feel about it? What do they think about it? What value do I have to bring to them? What problems do I need to solve for them in order for them to see my vision? Not just what I think is the important part. How can I make them, yes, explain that as well, because you are, you have the most information about it, but you have to also consider this person probably has competing interests. I used to work for the South Carolina Association of School Administrators. And so oftentimes when I sat in meetings and listened to the school administrators and the superintendents, I often thought to myself, teachers, counselors, and others often forget the competing interests that they have. It's not that they don't care about the arts, for example, but if you have your constituency coming at you and saying, oh, we need this, and it's not the arts that they're talking about, 9 times out of 10, they're trying to figure out how to get this group accepting and on board and becoming their advocate. So I'll go back to what I said earlier. The arts don't advocate enough for ourselves. If people don't understand our value, that's on us. So how do we do that? Not from the perspective of my class is great, my project is great, my dance is great, but what problems are we solving? What's the point? What's our value proposition? A lot of people don't like when I say that, but it's true. I'm gonna be honest. What is your value? If you can't communicate your value in a way that speaks to me, we're gonna all question how valuable you are. So that's the point. How do we get there? So when you're doing data, when you're evaluating your programs, think about it from, I need to tell these stories too, but I don't need to just tell people were engaged or how many kids came to a camp, but how did you move the needle for the community and all of these different audiences that you're trying to plug in and talk to. So I'm gonna stop there because I know I was supposed to stop at 11:30. There's so much more of the conversation. Jenny, please invite me back, but I wanted to stop there for a second and ask if there are any questions. Someone, Tanyelle, am I pronouncing your name correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Right now, literacy and other academic outcomes seem to really override any other focus. Sharing the impact the arts have on academics and proving it works. I agree with you 100%. And here's another point. Thank you for that. It made me think of something else. Dalisha and I and other groups that we work in together, we had this conversation recently. And it was oftentimes educators have to talk about those things, and they should, but as art enthusiasts, art practitioners, and we know how valuable the addition of the arts is, we need to tout and make sure that those outcomes are just as important and people understand them. So the one thing that I am trying to figure out and learn from my job also, guys, is how do I help you get the word out about all of the outcomes that have nothing to do with test scores, that are just important to success, the children's success. And those are some of the things that we've already talked about, or I mentioned earlier, like soft skills, like engagement, like thinking creatively, even if you don't go into a creative job. All of these things play a huge part in the effectiveness of who we are as citizens. But I don't know that those stories are being told. So those are the things I want you to think about. Tanyelle, you're absolutely right. So how do we combat that? Let's not get frustrated. How do we combat what you just said? And who do we talk to about those things? And who needs to know about those things? And those are the stories we go into and try to figure out. We're focused on shining a light on the impact. Did I get the point of your comment, Tanyelle, or no?
Absolutely. I'll tell you, as somebody that was principal at an art school, like a lot of times, the solution to a lot of things, if we're ever going to cut time, come from cutting everything, it seems like, except for reading and math. But I think that if we advocated for how they can be integrated, and I know that a lot of times, you know, people that aren't familiar or aren't comfortable with the arts, you know, the first thing they think is this is going to be another thing to do.
Yeah.
Or this is going to take more time. And that's one thing I don't have.
Yep.
Like being able to build a case for those things, that it's not about making more time, it's about the marriage of all those things. And I agree with you. Like, I think that we're so hyper focused a lot of times on test scores that my worry is, are we creating a group of people that aren't equipped with those skills? Because even in talking with business leaders and people that are trying to recruit kids into jobs, like a lot of the skills that they're missing is not being able to communicate, not being able to critically think. Like if you're given a problem and it doesn't look like a SE ready word problem, like what do I do with this?
Right.
Like being able to, the arts empowers people to do a lot more than what they realize.
That's right. And how do you, and I don't want this advocacy, communication, storytelling, all of that to be something else you have to do too. And that's why I'm trying to figure out ways that you can incorporate in what you already have to do. Like if you're evaluating your programs, add that to it. If you're talking to business leaders, Tanyelle, for example, that would be a great time to develop your pitch about why arts integration is so important and how that works. Because I can guarantee you most business leaders don't understand that. They may not have any clue about that. So some of the things that everyday advocacy can help is social media. Put those messages out on social media. Ask your board and or councils to have a slot once a month, once a year, whatever the case is, and make sure when you're talking to those folks that you're talking to them from their perspective. You can have a handout with all the nice data, but what's going to change their minds and move them? There's so many ways. Ed-op pieces in the your local papers. The arts it's not necessarily just something to do, and it's not something you have to do by yourself. Ask your school board. Like someone asked how to engage with the school board, start asking them to do stuff. Let them know how successful your programs are and just say, listen, I got to make sure these programs continue to be successful. You know what you could do for me? Take this short PowerPoint and go into the world and, give them 3 or 4 places to go to the city council. They're the ones who should be carrying. You can come with them if you want to, but they should be carrying that water. So when you're making plans for your school and all of the great things, make plans for your board members, make plans for your principal. Maybe your principal can't do it, but do it in coordination. If you're not the principal, do it in coordination with the principal and say, this is why it's necessary. All of this work doesn't have to happen by you, but you may just be the driver to make sure that it does happen. And coming up with a communications advocacy plan at the beginning of the year may not be a bad idea. Again, PTA, school boards, parents, but you have to equip them with some of the things that I said so that they won't just be talking or just telling a story, but telling it from the perspective of the people they're trying to change minds and help them to become their advocates. What else? And then I think someone else needs to speak.
I was
Jenny?
going to, oh,
Okay,
hey,
go ahead.
sorry.
No, please.
Hey,
Kelly, go ahead.
everybody, it's Kelly, and I apologize. I'm working on a mail out, but I am listening and I am engaged. One thing that we've done here in Lexington One is we have grown a partnership with our communications office. So every time there is something that we want to celebrate, advocate, we immediately reach out to them, and then they have a newsletter that goes out every week. And my goal is to have an art spotlight at least twice a month.
Yes.
So it's on their radar, folks see it, and it's nothing long. We try to keep it short, and we try to have a picture of something. But my question is there, since we've talked about evaluation data and advocacy, is there a certain type of communication that reaches people more so? I mean, I know a high number of us are visual learners, so I mean, that's obvious that that's something to focus on. But is there something is there a template, or is there something out there that we can access or just have the knowledge of what type of visuals and fonts and colors and things that appeal to people that we could have as a go-to? So when we are creating things, we're not leaning on our graphic artists and communications. If we have to come up with something and get it out there fast and quick on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, what should we use?
That's a great question. And I don't think there's a silver bullet for it, but I will look into it, Kelly, and get back to you. But what I will say is it's more of what you say than what everything looks like. And what I mean by that is relationship, trust. Those are the 2 biggest components of getting people to listen to you and follow you on whether it's social media or read what's in the newsletter. And what I mean by that is, do the people the audience of who's reading it, that it's great that you get that out there. But my 2 questions really could be rhetorical. You're more than welcome to answer it. Is, are you thinking about the audience and what you're writing? And then 2, does the audience have a relationship to you other than, that correspondence? And you don't have to answer that, but those are 2 crucial questions. And so while the appearance and all of that does matter, making sure, all of the English is right and all that good stuff, it's more of the message itself. What is being said? And is it the right thing for the right audience? I know you have a great communications. Was it, I don't know, I might be mixing up. Marianne Bird, wasn't she part of your communications, or no? That's the other Lexington. Okay. I know a few of them up there, but let them help you in that way. Or maybe at the beginning of the year, they probably will fall over, but you go to them and just say, help me build a communications plans for the year and think about the audiences and things of that nature. And they're probably equipped to do it because they love communications. And a lot of that will probably be taken off your plate. And it's something that you can just do as the year goes. It's, you know, something that you can do. So one of the things that we're doing is building videos about things that we want to be talking about, but we won't use them maybe for another year or another 6 months. So that we'll have, you know, with the end in mind, who are our audiences, what do we want to say, what's the goal, and then have those things so we can just build it, because communications is hard. It's another thing, just like arts, people always want to take it off the table or not pay for it, but both of them are so invaluable, and it's just a matter of making people, helping people to see that. Kelly, did I answer? I know I didn't answer you about fall. I know blue and green, for instance, is always, yeah, it is. It, you know, it's more amenable to people. I love red, and I'll throw that in a heartbeat, but most people are amenable to those soft primary colors like those two. So that helps a little bit with what you asked me. Kelly, keep in touch with me, and I will see if I can find out any more information about that. Jenny, did I touch base on what you asked about and what everyone else needed and what you wanted out of this session?
Yeah, you know, advocacy is something that all of us that are involved in the arts and touch on the arts need to be more aware of. And I loved your point about, you know, the arts don't advocate for themselves enough. And I've heard you say that several times now. So that really just motivates me to want to try to bring up arts education and arts programming in every conversation now. So that was a great motivating point to make.
And just as a little bit of inspiration, again, when I first came to Sumter, nobody would return my calls, y'all. Like, it hurt my feelings. And nobody would return my calls. They didn't know me. And they were like, who is this? Whatever. And by the end of it, they were inviting me to tables that the arts had not been asked about before. And so I want to give you guys permission to go be great. Like, give permission to talk about how great the arts are, how great your programs are. Give yourself permission to ask people to carry the water for you. Give yourself permission to ask why you're not at certain seats at certain tables. Have the confidence to do that, because the arts really do matter and they really do change things. I just think that we haven't talked about it quite enough. So thank you for your time. You can get my information if you don't already have it from Jenny. The last thing, Jenny, I want to say really quickly is, if you don't know the South Carolina Arts Alliance, we are a nonprofit organization. I am a one-person shop, and we advocate for the arts on a state level. And I have to make that distinction, because oftentimes there's so many things going on in the community, in the county or the city, that we can help with, but we can't really advocate with because of capacity, one. And then a lot of times there's a lot of politics and things that we don't understand because we're not in that community. So we offer training to help people with advocacy. We're starting regional art after dark events. Jenny's helping us with that, and one in October. And we're having one all over the state. We're going to start in Sumter, Rock Hill, and Spartanburg. And then someone just mentioned wanting to do one in Charleston soon. And that's just a time for arts educators, arts administrators, artists, any practitioner, local government officials, the General Assembly, all to come together and just have a great time to celebrate the arts and get to know each other, so that when the session happens, when it's time to ask for something, you'll be less likely to be intimidated about talking to these folks. So I love to be the communication for one of these events. We'll definitely do that. I'll keep Jenny posted. You can join the South Carolina Arts Alliance for free. We also have a paid version, like $5 a month, to get something a little bit extra. But that's what we do. And we just try to work with great people like Dalisha and Jenny, so that we can advocate and raise up the arts in South Carolina. Sounds good, Kellyanne. I will, if you just go to southcarolinaartsalliance.net, there's an option to join, and you just put your email address in there. I have to admit that it has been silent for a little while because I've been in this position for 6 months and I'm trying to figure out things. Thank you, Dalisha, for putting that in the chat for me. And so that will be up and coming within March and April and May. But thank you so much for your time. Please don't let this be the last time you talk to me. I hope to see you again. I might actually have to crash your 2-day conference in May because my birthday is May 18th. And so we need to celebrate together. That would be nice. But thank you so much.
Thanks, Melanie, and thanks, Dalisha. So just a quick note about the October event that Melanie mentioned. So that is that event is going to be held in conjunction with PSAE's annual fall conference, our Arts Integration and Arts Education Conference in October. The dates are 9th and 10th. We'll be hosting that in Spartanburg, South Carolina. So we're taking advantage of the fact that there will be so many wonderful arts educators in the same spot. So we're going to connect you guys with artists in the upstate area and then with representatives from that area as well. So we're going to have a great mixer, a great party, and you'll hear more information about that coming up with our conference. So hopefully we'll see all of you there. So before we go today, does anyone want to share their favorite takeaway from either presentation, talking about data with Dalisha and then talking about communication with Melanie? Does anybody have a favorite share out that they want to, or favorite takeaway that they want to share? Does anybody have any successes that they want to talk about and how they were able to use data to make a great presentation and were successfully able to advocate for more money or extending a program or creating a new program? Anybody want to share a success like that? Oh, Kellyanne's, and I think she had to leave to teach. So, yep, we've got Kellyanne's got one. I think this is a takeaway. If the value is not understood, it does not matter in regards to your constituent. Such a good reminder as we assume everyone appreciates what we do so often because we believe in our work so much. Yeah, that's a great quote. All right, and Roger, would you like to say something before we head out?
Yeah, thanks so much. I want to give a shout out to the beginning of Dalisha's presentation and her referencing the profile of a South Carolina graduate and the competencies. Earlier, I put a link in the chat, but I'm going to put it in the chat again. This takes you to our Office of Personalized Learning, and they have really honed in on those competencies and have a lot of very, very good information about those. And so as we move forward, I think part of connecting the arts to what we're doing in other content areas or to advocate in other areas is to make these connections that can happen through the profile of the South Carolina graduate. So look at those competencies, see how we are growing our students and their abilities to achieve in these competencies. And then we're speaking language of those who might not be as arts familiar, but understand some of these other things. So scroll through that website, find the worthwhile material there, and I hope it'll be a good resource for you. Thanks, Jenny.
Great. Thanks, Roger. And thanks everybody for attending today. Just as a reminder, this is through the Joint Arts Administrators Institute. I'm putting the link to PSAE's website where you'll find more information on the upcoming events. Our next event is April 28th. So put that on your calendar and then definitely put May 17th and 18th for our 2-day conference as well. So thank you all for attending today. I'll follow up. We did record the session, so that will be available for future use as well. So thanks everyone and have a great Friday.